Well, here we are again.
Yep, we are.
Session 2.
And this is session 2 in the story of marriage. And this is beginning with the end in mind.
Oh, I love that title.
We want everybody here to begin with the end in mind. And, you know, we don't know what the story of your marriage is up until this point.
Yeah.
But we do know that you can write a different ending. And we want you to have a vision for what it needs to land on, what it needs to look like.
Well, let's talk about movies, stories, novels. I mean, we always want them to end with a note of victory, or a happily ever after, or
They always say, and they lived happily ever after. And
right.
I'm like, how? How did they do that? Well, stop it, bring it back. How? We know how they met. I need to know the how.
It's because Hollywood doesn't have that answer.
Yeah, they don't have that answer. So we want to talk about the happily ever after.
So happily ever after then just doesn't happen, does it?
No.
It doesn't. So if that's our destination, shouldn't we know how we're going to get there? I mean, like, I'm traveling constantly, you're traveling constantly. When I rent a car, I love my Google Maps, you know? So I put the address in there.
I like my iPhone, yeah.
Yeah, my iPhone. I put my address in my iPhone, and I hit it, and you know what it does? It takes me there.
Yeah.
So what amazes me is how many people go into marriage and they don't have a destination.
No.
You know? So we'll plan for everything else, but we don't plan where's our destination going for our marriage. And that's what we want to talk about.
Well, the whole reason why God cut covenant with Abraham.
Oh, this is amazing.
And the whole reason he cut covenant with us was he had a purpose for it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many people, like so many people, if I say, why did God choose Abraham for a covenant? They're like, he was a father of faith.
Right.
It's because, you know, and no, actually God said that he chose Abraham for one reason.
One reason.
It said that he knew that Abraham would teach his descendants.
Genesis 18:19.
And that is so powerful. So God will look for people who understand that the covenant that he begins with them will not end with them.
Right.
He says, I want a covenant people who will understand this isn't just about them, but they're going to extend my goodness to 1,000 generations.
So you've got the word covenant is used over 280 times in the Old Testament. It's used over 30 times in the New Testament. And by the way, testament is the Latin word for covenant.
Yeah.
And so God cuts covenant with this guy. And what does covenant do? It ends up affecting thousands of generations.
Because by teaching his children, it said every nation was blessed. Wow. And I don't think we understand what happens between two people, private, has the impact on their children, has an impact on legacy, has an impact on nations.
Yes.
And so we really want to weigh this heavily. And so if your story is just about you and I just want to be happy and I want us to all stay the same, it's not going to be big enough. Right. You need to know that your life is going to touch everyone you actually come in contact with and everybody that passes through you.
So your story's then it's more than about you as a couple. It's about the impact you're going to have.
Yeah,
the multiplication of effectiveness you're going to have as a couple, which is going to be greater than if you were just by yourself.
Absolutely.
If our job then is just to improve our marriage right now, because I know we're talking to a lot of couples right now, and your
They're
marriage,
just like, we just want it to get better.
You're just like you might be in you might be in this weekend getaway your church is putting on, and your goal is just to survive, right? Now, I'm glad you're at least wanting to survive rather than desecrating God's work, okay? But that's not enough. If our goal is just to survive, that's not enough. And so now we're not going to grow into the largeness of marriage if we just want to survive. So get beyond that. Okay, I know I commend you for saying, hey, we're going to watch this because we want to survive you. We tricked you, great. We want you walking out of here with a large vision for your marriage.
And I love what you pulled about the Westminster.
The Westminster Shorter Catechism is man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. So what, Lisa, then would be God's goal for marriage?
Well, you know, we touched on it with Malachi before, and we talked about His Spirit and having the details, but it says, what does God want from marriage? It says, children of God.
Wow.
That's what. Wow. So guard the spirit of marriage within you. Don't cheat on your spouse. And then God goes on to say, I hate divorce, says the God of Israel. God of the angel armies. I love how he's like power positioning himself. He's like, this is like, I need you to understand, I've got some pretty heavy artillery backing me.
Yeah.
I hate the violent dismembering.
Stop right there.
I know.
Violent dismembering
Of the one flesh of marriage.
Wow.
So
Okay,
watch
so
watch yourself. Watch yourself.
Think of Michelangelo's Statue of
Yeah.
David, right?
Yeah, violent dismembering.
Can you imagine somebody coming up and
Taking an
violently
axe to it.
dismembering that? But yet that's nothing compared to us violently dismembering God's art.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
so he says,
gosh,
so
that's
watch
heavy.
yourself. He doesn't say, so watch your mate.
Yeah, that's good.
He says, so watch yourself.
That's powerful.
He says, don't let your guard down. Don't cheat. And I actually, this don't cheat, I know everybody's like, oh gosh, are you talking about adultery? I mean, I think we cheat the process of God a lot of times because we endure things instead of actually allow it to transform us. God's saying, don't cheat. Do the hard things. Let the work happen.
Yeah.
So God isn't just looking for more babies to populate the earth. He's like, I need more people singing songs about me. He's not looking for that. God is looking for
Not just
children
looking for
of
that.
God.
Right.
Yeah, of course he loves when
Right.
we reproduce and we have children, but even more, God will bless marriages that never have children. Because
Right.
what
There's a
happens is
purpose.
through marriage, you become a child of God. Through marriage, you take on more
Of
of
the
God's
image of
nature.
Jesus Christ.
And absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
so that is God's goal for marriage.
to
And
make
this
us
is
children
something,
of
I'll be
God.
honest with you, I didn't understand until we really started diving into the scriptures. If you look at marriage is a representation of Jesus' relationship with the church. He's the bridegroom, we're the bride. Okay? So it's a mystery, Paul says.
Yeah.
And involved in this mystery is also the mystery of becoming one flesh as a husband and wife.
Which is Jesus' happily ever after.
Right.
is
His
this.
happily ever after is this, Ephesians 5:27, that he might present her
Yes.
to himself a glorious church. Now, when you hear the word glorious, it speaks of greatness, beauty, magnificence. A magnificent church, not having spot, wrinkle, or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So that's his goal for his marriage with us, his bride. Okay? Now, how does he accomplish this mission?
Yeah.
Well, he answers that in the previous verses. He says, Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word.
Yeah.
So how does he make us glorious? By speaking the word over us, by being the word in us.
Yeah.
Now, this is mirrored for us as husbands and wives, because Paul says in Ephesians 4:15, speaking the truth in love may grow up into all things into him, which is the head, even Christ. So Paul says, as we speak the truth in love to one another, we grow up. Now,
Into children of God.
notice he doesn't say speaking the truth. He says speaking the truth in love. Notice he doesn't just say love.
Yeah.
Okay, because here's what you got. You got two extremes in marriage. You got people who will use the word to get revenge on their mates. And you got people who just keep suppressing the disappointment, suppressing the offense they have with their mate, and just trying to do a superficial love. Both are wrong.
Yeah.
If we're going to be like Jesus, we're going to speak the truth in love, which means if Lisa really disappoints me, it's wrong for me to keep silent. What I need to do is first forgive, because Jesus first forgave us on the cross. You know, Christians will make this statement all the time. I forgive them when they apologize. If Jesus would have waited for us to apologize, we never would have gotten saved.
Right.
He forgave us on the cross when he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. He wasn't speaking just to the soldiers and the Sanhedrin.
So we need to know what we're doing. If I'm hurting you,
Right.
I need to know what I'm doing.
I got to first forgive. I cannot approach her because I can't speak the truth in love. Otherwise, I'm speaking the truth in revenge. And now it becomes a wrong weapon. Okay? So let me just put it to you this way. The John Bevere of 30 years ago was very selfish. The John Bevere of 30 years ago was very self-focused. It took me getting married, and now Lisa's speaking the truth in love, right? And all of a sudden
more
I'm
the
going, my
truth and
eyes
not
are
in
getting
love
opened
always,
up to
but
my
yes.
own condition. So what's that?
I said I did more of the truth than the love part.
No, there are many times you've spoken the truth in love to me, but it would open my eyes to see my conditions so I could say, oh God, remove that from my life. See, because what happens is we come into marriage almost like ore comes out of a mine shaft. You know, when they harvest gold out of the earth, it doesn't come out pure gold like we got on our rings.
Right.
It's got all kinds of impurities in it.
Right.
And you know what the furnace does? The furnace causes the impurities to come to the surface.
Yeah.
You know what marriage does? It causes the impurities to come to the surface. I mean, one time I said, God, where's all this stuff coming from? What do I bind? What do I cast out of me? And God said to me, He said, you can't cast your flesh out. That's what He said to me.
It's got to kill
And
it.
I said, well, again, would you explain this? Because I was getting so angry at Lisa, right? And the Lord said, son, look at the gold ring on your finger. It's 14 karat gold. If you put that 14 karat gold in a furnace and heat it up to 7,000 degrees. Now, I have an engineering degree background. He said, what happens? I said, well, it liquefies. He said, and that what happens? Now, I'm greatly simplifying this. I said, the impurities come to the surface. The copper, the zinc, the nickel. He said, so they appear, right? I said, yeah, they appear. He said, were they always in there? I said, yeah, they were. He said, so they weren't visible to you, but the heat brought them up. I said, yeah. He said, but they were visible to me.
Exactly.
And so what happens is I get married and all of a sudden I'm in the furnace because Paul said, you're going to get married, you're going to have struggle in the flesh. Hello, welcome to the furnace. Okay?
But it's a good work because that
is.
struggle is going to make us more godlike.
Right.
That's what's exciting.
And
Yeah.
we want that.
Absolutely.
I want to be conformed to the image of Jesus.
Yeah.
I want to be conformed to the image of Jesus more than I want to be right, more than I want to be proud, more than I want to be selfish.
Even more than we want to be happy. And I think a lot of people need to understand there is a fellowship of His suffering. And sometimes you go through seasons that are not fun, but they season you for a next season of strength.
Yes.
You know, Jesus talks about this, Paul's referring to what Jesus did in Hebrews 12. And since he is the writer of our story,
This is the
ultimately-
recipe for the furnace right
Yes,
here, what you're about to share.
Exactly. Hebrews 12, verses 2 through 3. It says, keep your eyes on Jesus, not keep your eyes on your mate. Keep your eyes
That's so
on
good, Lisa.
Jesus. Not even look at yourself. Keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race we're in. Study how He did it.
You said began and finished.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Not just began.
He didn't just start.
Okay,
'Cause
so
a lot
there's
of
got
people
to be a
start
finish
well
because we're talking about starting
and
with
end
the
up
end in
really
mind.
stupid.
We're going to finish.
Right, exactly.
Okay, go ahead. That was so good.
Study how He did it because He never lost sight of where He was headed.
Google
this
Maps.
is the power of the vision. You have to understand where you are headed. That exhilarating finish in and with God. He could put up with anything along the way. Cross, shame, whatever. And now He's there in the place of honor, right alongside God.
Yes.
When you find yourself flagging in your faith, go over that story again, item by item, that long litany of hostility. He plowed through.
Wow.
That will shoot adrenaline into your souls.
Okay, so
Adrenaline.
there
So-
it is.
Yeah, so Jesus.
Have you ever felt like you were flagging in faith in our marriage?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Jesus. Jesus. But
Did you need some adrenaline?
I needed coffee. Jesus, he was following what God has always done.
Yeah.
And what sets our God up differently than any of the other false gods. God ends something, then He begins it.
Right.
Yes.
And
So Jesus saw the joy set before Him. He saw us.
yeah.
When He went to the cross, He didn't see the cross. He looked through the cross. And He saw you and I.
And He didn't see us as a bunch of no good sinners. Otherwise, He would have gotten off the cross and said,
Yeah.
Legion of Angels, come and get
He
me
said,
out of
"It's
here."
not worth it."
He saw the finished
Yeah.
product.
Exactly.
He saw us as
Yeah.
a pure, chaste virgin
Yeah.
that would be presented to Him on the
Right.
great wedding day.
Right. And we need to understand that if we are going to act like children of God, then we need to act like Jesus and we need to act like our Father.
Yeah.
And this is what He says in Isaiah 46.
I
He
love
says,
this.
I am God and there is no one like me, declaring the end from the beginning.
Come on.
So that is what we do. We declare the end from our beginning.
Right.
And most people just think, oh, this is so sweet, and then they have a shock when it doesn't look like how it began. But that's because they aren't moving towards the end. So
So God
learning.
is basically
Yeah.
a mission planner.
Yeah.
A mission, well, he's a mission motivated.
Yeah.
And he's a planner.
Absolutely.
So he's got a mission and he plans how to get to that mission.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so our most significant portion of our love story should be how it ends, not how it begins.
Right.
But you know, with most people, the most significant part of their love story is how it begins,
How
not
they
how it
met,
ends.
how they
and,
met.
And it's surviving now.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
so can I just publicly tell you what, I have 2 huge goals, personal goals with Lisa. Okay, this is my personal goals. That when we come to the close of our time here on the earth as a married couple, right, that she will be more in love with me than the day we married.
Right.
And my second goal is that I will be more in love with her than the day we married. That is my passionate goal. And I'm willing to endure anything that would try to come against it to keep that goal. Okay? Now, we have goals that we want to minister to multitudes of people, the people that God has called us to minister to as a couple. That's a good goal. But my number one goal is I don't want to touch millions of people's lives through books and ministry and traveling, and Lisa going, I'm glad I got through this marriage. I'm glad I'm going to heaven. I'm glad it's over. I'm glad I don't want to see him.
Yeah.
God, can you give him a mansion on the other side of the city?
There was a time that I was talking to God about that. I was like, okay, I will stay with him on earth if you promise me in heaven we have separate quarters. I just need to sleep. So yeah.
Okay, so that's one of my goals. I want her to say, God, can we please share a mansion together? And I'll give her her own bedroom if I'm snoring, okay? But
you won't snore in heaven.
I won't snore in heaven. I'll be redeemed from that. Yeah, that's right. So God is mission motivated and he's a planner. So, you know, how do we judge races? By how they start or how they end? How many times does a horse race start and the horse that's in the middle of the pack ends up 7 lengths ahead of everybody else at the end? Well, who's everybody talk about?
Right.
Yeah.
The one that finished well and won the race.
Right.
You don't talk about the one that was in the lead the first quarter of the race.
Yeah.
Or the second quarter of the race.
Which should give everybody hope.
Right.
If they've had a bad start, they can still have an amazing ending.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Absolutely. I mean, what happens to people that don't plan for retirement financially? What happens? They end up in ruin. We've seen personal examples of this, of people that have nothing in their latter years because they didn't plan. What about building a house? Do you know they actually tried to build something down in Pueblo, just down the road, without a blueprint, and it was a disaster? Okay? You've got a business. You want to start a business. Everybody knows. Every good businessman and woman knows. You have a business plan before you start your business. And that business plan's got to look right before you begin that business. You know, Jesus said you count the costs before you start construction. Otherwise, you get halfway through and you give up. Right? Because it's going to get tough. So this is what we've got to do with marriages. Too many marriages fail because of unrealistic expectations and a lack of vision, planning, and commitment to the process and the vision.
yeah, absolutely. You know, and so again, I mean, I just want to reiterate, it doesn't matter what your past has been. It doesn't matter what you're bringing to the table. It doesn't matter. You can completely, intentionally change it. And John and I have not done it perfectly.
No.
But I would say we've done it well, which means our marriage is healthy. It's not perfect. And you can have a good marriage, even if it's not perfect. You can have a good marriage.
Does Jesus say to us?
No, he doesn't say perfectly done. He says, well done. Well done. And that means you did it healthy. You did it well.
Right.
In the end, other people were able to be refreshed by your life. And when John and I first got married, we were so poor that we would go out to this Chinese restaurant together and we would order one order of mushu chicken.
Mushu chicken.
And we would get an extra pancake and extra side of plum sauce.
Right.
And we would take 2 pancakes each and we would slather the plum sauce and we would dump the rice and we would eat it and we would dream. We would dream. We talked about what it would look like when we had children. We talked about...
We'd only been married for a year.
Not even. I think we had just started.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Because both of us, we were coming from a place where John's family did it well, but they didn't do it the way we wanted to do it. My family did not do it well. And so we knew there was nothing I was bringing to the table. So we were like, we are the example of what not to do. Your family has done it well, but there was a lot more we wanted to see different. And so we actually would write on the paper napkins. Like we would be talking, and then in the moment of talking, we'd get so inspired, like, oh my gosh, yes, we're not grounding our kids. We're going to make them slave labor. And we would write things down, or we would say, what do you think about allowances? And, well, we're not going to pay allowances for them doing what they should do. Let's just pay allowances if we make them do extra work. That's a great idea. And we would write things down.
Because we wanted them to take responsibility as a family member.
Because we had seen what happened with our siblings. I am the oldest. I was the child that was spanked. I was the child that did work. My brother came along and they're like, our son, he'll do nothing. And I remember it was just like, what? And so I was like, no, kids are getting spanked. Because it created a completely different dynamic. So we would talk about the unique family that we wanted to build. We also dreamed. We dared to dream. We would say, we want to have the house everybody wants to come to. We want to create an environment where our kids will invite their friends. We don't care if it's a fancy house. We want it to be a warm house. We want it to be a welcoming house. We sat down and we talked about how your parents had ended up financially versus how my parents had ended up financially. My parents had had a lot of money, a lot of adultery, a lot of alcoholism, and a lot of divorce. So they ended up with nothing. His parents had less money.
Moderate salary.
And had saved and understood the principle that they were laying up for their children.
They lived below their means.
Yeah.
And that was attractive to me. My dad always lived below his means, and my dad never lacked. And my dad has provided so beautifully for all of us. So we started talking about that. How are we going to handle our finances?
Yeah.
And we started coming up with plans.
And we made decisions to not have credit card debt. I mean, that just sounds like stupid, but we just said, if God isn't going to give it to us, we're not going to take it. We're not going to have credit card debt.
We said we're going to treat a credit card like a checkbook.
Well, we couldn't even get a credit card at
which means we're going to pay it off at the end of the month. We made the decision. We're going to pay off the credit card at the end of the month.
Yeah.
And these are things that we started setting up for ourselves as governors, so that we could get to our destination. I did not want my children having to provide for me when we were older. Okay, we have that with one of our parents. We're providing for them. We're glad to do it.
Yeah.
But I never wanted to be a burden on any of my children. I wanted my children never to have to think about us. I wanted God to be our source, but I realized that God can give people finances and they just squander them. And they don't understand about planning. And so
and we understood that it had to be bigger than just our children. That had to be our children's children. So when Proverbs 13:22 says, good people, godly people, leave an inheritance to their grandchildren or their children's children, which actually makes me realize you can't really measure a life with just the children.
Now,
you have to look how it's reflected in the children's children. Because if you don't steward your children well, they will not steward their children well. So sometimes it doesn't show up in the first generation, but it shows up in the next generation. And so we talked about we want to leave an inheritance for our children's children.
Yep.
And we wanted to end up as best friends.
We want to end up as best friends.
Not as strangers. Because we saw too many people that when their kids moved out,
they were strangers.
They looked at each other and said, "Who are you?" Because their whole life was around raising their children. And so we wanted to work on making sure that we made our marriage a priority. Even though the seasons would look different, we wanted to actually want to spend time with each other at the end. We wanted to find out what our union might produce as far as fruit in the lives of other people. And
what's really amazing is that here we are in this Chinese restaurant, we're writing things down. And listen to what Malachi 3:16 says. Then those who feared the Lord spoke to one another. It doesn't say they spoke to him, they spoke to one another.
Yeah.
And the Lord listened and heard them. So a book of remembrance was written before him for those who feared the Lord and who meditated on his name. Yeah. So here we are in this Chinese restaurant. We're writing things down. We wrote things down later in our apartment. And what was happening, we didn't realize until later, God was listening to our conversation. And he's writing down a book.
Yeah.
And so not only does he say write the vision in Habakkuk, he says write the vision, right? Get it before you get the business plan, get the blueprints, get write the vision. But God's saying, you know what? While you're talking, I'm writing a book too.
Yeah.
So
he says, I'm going to remember this conversation.
and there are things
I'm going to remember
in
when
our
it looks
life
different.
today
I'm going to remember this conversation.
that God wrote down that we didn't even write down.
Yeah.
That we've seen come to pass because God wrote a book of remembrance.
Yeah.
There are benefits. We're enjoying covenant benefits from Him, blessing from Him. That we didn't even write it down on paper. But Lisa, we're enjoying it today.
Yeah. And so if you haven't done this, if you've been kind of just piecemealing it or just everything is great and you're loving your season, I'm going to challenge you to write a living, breathing, organic document.
And that can change, can it? It can be altered, right?
It needs to have some non-negotiables.
Yes.
It needs to have, we are committed to one another. We are committed to one another's growth. We are committed to
the
one
process.
another's, right, exactly. Whatever the commitments are, those we are going to be faithful. We are going to worship God together. There's going to be certain things that are going to be non-negotiables that cannot change, but it can be added to repeatedly. And so you need to be adding this. As God drops something in your spirit, you need to add it. Because there's something so faith-stirring that when you are very specific with God and He does it, it just, you're like, oh my gosh, He did that. Let's write down some more. And so you get super excited. So we wanted to have a step-by-step evaluation of our relationship, how we were going to relate to one another, how we were going to relate to our children, how we were going to relate to our world, how we were going to relate to money. These are all things that you cannot just leave to accident. Exactly. And so each and every one of you needs to have a place to dream.
Yep.
And ours was a Chinese restaurant. Now we have 2 chairs in our bedroom. When we sit in those chairs, we're not allowed to fight. We have to look at each other and be nice. It's like a no fight zone. And then we dream about things. And then if you're visual, pull pictures, pull magazine things, take photos, write things down, and just begin to dreamscape your life, because God is actually trying to build something large inside of you that He wants to dreamscape.
But let me say this. Some of you, couples may be together right now, and you got a lot of garbage on your decks. So the first thing you got to do in carrying out the plan of your dream is got to clear the decks. That's what we're going to talk about in the next session.